Chapter 11. Flight to the Hills. At first, Taryn offered to let Eileen ride Mellingar, but the girl refused. "I can walk as well as any of you," she cried, so angrily that Taryn made no more of it. He had learned to be wary of the girl's sharp tongue. It was agreed that the white mare would carry the weapons taken from Spiral Castle, except the sword Durnwin, of which Eileen had appointed herself guardian. Scratching in the dirt with his dagger point, Fluter showed Taryn the path he intended to follow. "The hosts of the Horned King will surely stay in the Valley of Estrad. It's the easiest way for an army on the march. Spiral Castle is here," he added, with an angry jab to mark the spot, "west of the River Estrad. Now the shortest road will be straight north over these hills." "That is the one we must take," said Taryn, trying hard to make sense of Fluter's crisscrossing lines. "Wouldn't recommend it, my friend. We should be passing a little too near Anuvin. Aeron's strongholds are close to Spiral Castle, and I suggest we keep clear of them. No, what I believe we should do is this. Stay on the high ground of the western bank of the Estrad. We can go quite directly, since we needn't follow the valley itself. That way we can avoid both Anuvin and the Horned King. The four of us can move faster than heavily armed warriors. We shall come out well ahead of them, not too far from Caerdathil. From there we will make a dash for it, and our task is done." Fluter straightened up, beaming with satisfaction. "There you have it," he said, wiping the dirt from his dagger. "A brilliant strategy. My own war leader couldn't have arranged it better." "Yes," said Taryn, his head still muddled with the bard's talk of high ground and western banks. "That sounds very reasonable." They descended to a broad, sun-swept meadow. The morning had turned bright and warm. Dew still clung to bending blades of grass. At the head of the travelers strode Fluter, stepping out briskly on his long, spindly shanks. The harp jogged on his back. His shabby cloak was rolled over his shoulder. Eileen, hair disheveled by the breeze, the great black sword slung behind her, followed next, with Gurgi immediately after. So many new leaves and twigs had stuck to Gurgi's hair that it began to look like a walking beaver dam. He loped along, swinging his arms, shaking his head from side to side, moaning and muttering. Holding Mellingar's bridle, Taryn marched last in line. Except for the weapons lashed to the horse's saddle, these travelers might have been on a spring ramble. Eileen chattered gaily. Now and then, Fluter burst into a snatch of song. Taryn alone was uneasy. To him, the bright morning felt deceptively gentle. The golden trees seemed to cover dark shadows. He shuddered even in the warmth. His heart was troubled, too, as he watched his companions. In Caer-Dallben he had dreamed of becoming a hero, but dreaming, he had come to learn, was easy, and at Caer-Dallben no lives depended on his judgment. He longed for Gwydion's strength and guidance. His own strength, he feared, was not equal to his task. He turned once for a last look in the direction of Spiral Castle, Gwydion's burial mound. Over the hill crest, stark against the clouds, rose two figures on horseback. Taryn shouted and gestured for his companions to take cover in the woods. Mellingar galloped forward. In another moment, they were all crouching in a thicket. The horsemen followed along the crest, too far away for Taryn to see their faces clearly, but from their rigid postures he could guess at the livid features and dull eyes of the Cauldron-born. "How long have they been behind us?" asked Fluter. "Have they seen us?" Taryn looked cautiously through the screen of leaves. He pointed toward the slope. "There's your answer," he said. From the crest, the pale Cauldron warriors had turned their horses toward the meadow and were steadily picking their way down the hill. "Hurry," ordered Taryn. "We must outrun them." The group did not return to the meadow, but struck out across the woods. The appearance of the Cauldron-born now forced them to abandon the path Fluter had chosen, but the bard hoped they might throw the warriors off the track and circle back again to the higher ground. Staying close to one another, they moved at a dog trot, not daring to stop even for water. The forest offered a measure of protection from the sun, but after a time the pace began to tell on them. Only Gurgi did not seem fatigued or uncomfortable. He loped steadily along, and the swarms of midges and stinging insects could not penetrate his matted hair. Eileen, who proudly insisted she enjoyed running, clung to Mellingar's stirrup. Taryn could not be sure how close the warriors were. He knew the Cauldron-born could hardly fail to track them, by sound if nothing else, for they no longer attempted to move silently. Speed was their only hope, and long after nightfall they pressed on. It had become a blind race into darkness, under a moon drowned in heavy clouds. Invisible branches grasped at them or slashed their faces. Islandwy stumbled once, and Taryn pulled her to her feet. The girl faltered again, her head drooped. Taryn unstrapped the weapons on Melangar's saddle, shared out the burden with Fluter and Gurgi, and hoisted the protesting island on Melangar's back. She slumped forward, her cheek pressed against the horse's golden mane. All night they struggled through the forest, which grew denser the closer they approached the Estrad Valley. By the time the first hesitating light of day appeared, even Gurgi had begun to stumble with fatigue and could barely put one hairy foot in front of the other. Islandwy had fallen into a slumber so deep Taryn feared she was ill. Her hair lay bedraggled and damp on her forehead, her face was pallid. With the bard's help, Taryn lifted her from the saddle and propped her against a mossy bank. When he ventured to unbuckle the cumbersome sword, Islandwy opened one eye, made an irritated face, and pulled the blade away from him, with more determination than he had expected. "You never understand things the first time," Islandwy murmured, her grip firm on the weapon. "But I imagine assistant pig keepers are all alike. I told you before you're not to have it, and now I'll tell you for the second time. Or is it the third, or fourth? I must have lost count." So saying, she wrapped her arms around the scabbard and dropped back to sleep. "We must rest here," Taryn said to the bard, "if only a little while." "At the moment," groaned Fluter, who had stretched out full length with his toes and nose pointing straight into the air, "I don't care who catches me. I'd welcome Aaron himself and ask whether he had any breakfast with him." "The Cauldron-born might have lost track of us during the night," Taryn said hopefully, but without great conviction. "I wish I knew how far we've left them behind, if we've left them behind at all." Gurgi brightened a little. "Clever Gurgi will know," he cried, "with seekings and peekings." In another moment, Gurgi was halfway up a tall pine. He clambered easily to the top and perched there like an enormous crow, scanning the land in the direction they had traveled. Taryn, meanwhile, opened the saddlebags. So little food remained that it was hardly worth dividing. He and Fluter agreed to give Islandwy the last of the provisions. Gurgi had scented food even at the top of the pine tree, and he came scuttling down, sniffing eagerly at the prospect of his crunchings and munchings. "Stop thinking about eating for a moment," Taryn cried. "What did you see?" "Two warriors are far, but Gurgi sees them. Yes, they are riding full of wickedness and fierceness. But there is time for a small crunching," Gurgi pleaded. "Oh, very small for clever, valiant Gurgi." "There are no more crunchings," said Taryn. "The Cauldron-born are still on our heels. You had better worry less about your food and more about your own skin." "But Gurgi will find munchings very quickly. Oh, yes, he is so wise to get them, to comfort the bellies of great noble lords. But they will forget poor Gurgi, and not even give him snips and snaps for his earnings." After a hurried discussion with Fluter, who looked as ravenous as Gurgi, Taryn agreed they might take a little time to search for berries and edible roots. "Quite right," said the bard. "Better eat what we can get now, while the Cauldron-born give us a chance to do it. I shall help you. I know all about foraging in the woods. Do it constantly." The harp tensed and one string showed signs of giving way. "No," he added quickly. "I had better stay with Islandwy. The truth is I can't tell a mushroom from a toadstool. I wish I could. It would make the life of a wandering bard considerably more filling." With cloaks in which to carry back whatever they might find, Taryn and Gurgi set off. At a small stream, Taryn halted to fill Gwydion's leather water flask. Gurgi, sniffing hungrily, ran ahead and disappeared into a stand of rowans. Near the bank of the stream, Taryn discovered mushrooms and gathered them hurriedly. Bent in his own search, he paid little heed to Gurgi, until he suddenly heard anguished yelps from behind the trees. Clutching his precious mushrooms, Taryn hastened to see what had happened, and came upon Gurgi lying in the middle of the grove, writhing and whimpering, a honeycomb beside him. At first, Taryn thought Gurgi had got himself stung by bees. Then he saw the creature was in more serious trouble. While Gurgi had climbed for the honey, a dead branch had snapped under his weight. His twisted leg was pinned to the ground with heavy wood on top of it. Taryn heaved the branch away. The panting Gurgi shook his head. "Poor Gurgi's leg is broken," he moaned. "There will be no more amblings or ramblings for him now." Taryn bent and examined the injury. The leg was not broken, though badly torn and swelling rapidly. "Now Gurgi's head must be chopped off," the creature moaned.
Do it, great lord, do it quickly. Gurgi will squeeze up his eyes so as not to see hurtful slashings.
Terran looked closely at Gurgi. The creature was in earnest. His eyes pleaded with Terran.
Yes, yes, cried Gurgi. Now, before silent warriors arrive, Gurgi is better dead at your sword than in their hands. Gurgi cannot walk. All will be killed with fearful smitings and bitings. It is better.
No, said Terran. You won't be left in the woods, and you won't have your head chopped off by me or anyone else. For a moment, Terran almost regretted his words. The poor creature was right, he knew. The injury would slow their pace, and Gurgi, like all of them, would be better off dead than in Aaron's grasp. Still, Terran could not bring himself to draw his sword. You and Island, we can ride Melongar, Terran said, lifting Gurgi to his feet and putting one of the creature's hairy arms about his shoulder. Come on now, one step at a time. Terran was exhausted when they reached Islandwy and the bard. The girl had recovered noticeably and was chattering even faster than before, while Gurgi lay silently on the grass. Terran divided the honeycomb. The portions were pitifully small. Fluter called Terran aside. Your hairy friend is going to make things difficult, he said quietly. If Melongar carries 2 riders, I don't know how much longer she can keep up. That is true, said Terran, yet I see nothing else we can do. Would you abandon him? Would you have cut off his head? Absolutely, cried the bard. In a flash. A flab never hesitates. Fortunes of war and all that. Oh, drat and blast, there goes another string. A thick one, too. When Terran went back to rearrange the weapons they would now be obliged to bear, he was surprised to find a large oak leaf on the ground before his cloak. On the leaf lay Gurgi's tiny portion of honeycomb.
For great lord, murmured Gurgi. Gurgi is not hungry for crunchings and munchings today.
Terran looked at the eager face of Gurgi. For the first time they smiled at one another. Your gift is generous, Terran said softly. But you travel as one of us. You'll need all your strength. Keep your share. It is yours by right. You have more than earned it. He put his hand gently on Gurgi's shoulder. The wet wolfhound odor did not seem as objectionable as before.